So yes, good afternoon. My name is Ian Nock. I am the vice chair of the Institution of Engineering Technologies Media Technology Network, which is the volunteer committee who reach out into the industry on behalf of the IET, of which the IET is one of the 6 owners of IBC, to organise events such as this, both here at IBC and throughout the year, primarily in the UK, but sometimes a little bit farther afield. I'm also a managing consultant of my own company, Fairmile West Consulting, and I also am the chair of the interoperability working group of the Ultra HD Forum, which is where my interest in a lot of video comes from. It's from the work I do and actually from the work I do with the forum. And in this 100th year since the first recognizable proper human face was seen on a television screen, which will be 100 years as of the 2nd of October coming up. This is really us moving into the 2nd century of television. And we're going to have partly a little retrospective, partly a look to the present and a look to the future of where visual experience has improved from the first television services or television that was running in 1925. So I just want to take you quickly through those developments. So first thing here is that television is interesting because the word itself was defined in 1900, 25 years before anyone had a working system. That's the scale of the interest. They had discovered radio communications and had already moved on and thought, well, we can get voice across that. We can obviously try and put video across that. Or actually didn't call it video, of course. They called it moving pictures or images or whatever. It was also interesting at the time, of course, is they had actually invented the fax machine. So they had a way of sending pictures. It just wasn't particularly dynamic. And they had that for a very long time. But the thing about defining a word television for vision at a distance, that's what television meant then. In many people's eyes, it's changed to a different meaning. And in many respects today in the modern world, it really should be back to its original meaning because television is the service, in our view, rather than the device, especially when so many people, don't watch a big screen necessarily for everything, but also because, television, it's idiosyncratic in the fact that the TV we watch today, the physical devices, bear almost no technical resemblance to what was originally created in 1925. In fact, I'm quite famously referred to the television invented by John Logie Baird as being the television we don't watch. But also, even the television we had in our youths, even those people who are very young, but probably everyone in this room is old enough to have watched a CRT, that television bears no resemblance to the televisions that we have today. But running quickly through, that first video was pretty poor. It was very, very low dynamic range. I don't think anyone's even estimated what it was because of the way it was produced. It had huge issues with light levels from the camera sensors themselves, all the way through to the actual way it was displayed using a large rotating wheel to create vertical scan lines. And I think they had 30 scan lines in a vertical orientation in a portrait display. Remember that. When everyone tells you about mobile phones and says, why don't we have it in portrait? Well, the first television that worked had portrait. There's reasons why it's not kept portrait. But anyway, so developments then, 30 lines, about 15 frames per second. Not that they actually referred to frames back then so much. That took a lot more development. And it was over the next 20 years that what was more similar to what we watch today was created through electronic television, through the developments, like in many respects what John Logie Baird had, in that he stood on the shoulders of giants and built upon many years of discoveries and deliveries, and he was the one who basically made it work by improving the camera sensors to the extent that they could actually capture the image. The rest of the developments that have taken place since then have always been about improving that capture, improving that display, right through to the first colour televisions, which again, John Logie Baird, 1928, again, nothing like what we've got today. He made it work, but that's not the colour television we watch ourselves. That really came through in the years of commercialization post the Second World War, where we started to have colour developments, particularly in the US, all the way through to the European developments derived from that, through NTSC into PAL and CCAM and all the rest of that. Important thing to also note, by the way, is the television they had in the 1930s was defined as HD TV at 405 lines, which if you think about it is a lot more than the 30. That's definitely a big jump, very noticeable. You can certainly see that at 3 meters or more. But onwards through development of colour, development of larger screen televisions, still largely dependent upon standard definition, as we came to call it, through into the digital era and the development of true high definition TV going up to 1920 by 1080. Also the digitalization pieces going through via a number of dead ends through into a full digital world today. Thank God for that, because I don't think we could have afforded the spectral density of analog digital based televisions. So it all developed through HD to what we recognize today. And then, of course, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, we started to have proper commercialization beginning of Ultra HD based television sets using obviously a lot more pixels, 4 times what the HD image could produce. And also a change happening in terms of the color representation. It had already happened several times because the color definition early on was quite relatively low in comparison. It's evolved over time for those people who are really into it, going from what they defined retrospectively as Rec 601 going through to 709, love the numbers, all the way through to now to 2020 and 2100. And for those people who don't know what those numbers are, you can talk to us at the end. So now we're in this age where we've got 4K, we've got HDR, we've got wide color gamut, we've got decent frame rates that are much higher than 30 frames per second, going up to 60, going up to 110, 120, whatever you want to have really. And of course, we even have displays now that do way above that, which are much more into gaming. But certainly the visual experience has changed quite considerably from that. And so what we've got here today is an esteemed panel of people who've worked in that area for the last, well, each of them can say how long they've been working here. I won't be so offensive to say how long some of us have worked in this industry. Hey, Chris. So I'll let them introduce themselves and they'll tell you more about them and their involvement in this. So Chris, would you like to come up and introduce yourself more fully to the few people in the room who don't know you?
Hasten to add, I'm convinced that Ian was one of these people that used to do cave paintings in France. That's when he started his career off, so possibly longer than me. But I've actually been in the industry about 40 years now. Started off at the BBC, worked my way through building one of the first stereo sound stages in Television Centre, and then moved on to this, what was a dodgy corporation called Sky, which didn't have a satellite in orbit when I joined them. Luckily, they managed to get one in orbit by the time they launched. But that was a 36-year heady travel through the histories of television, all the way from analog right the way through to digital in SD and 4:3, then the transition to 14:9, if anybody remembers that, before we went to 16:9 digital, which was way ahead of some of our colleagues in the US and Europe, and then went into, obviously, the full digital 16:9, migrating all the way through to HD, UHD. Can I say 3D? Kind of long-lived 3D, yes. It's still around, but you just don't see it so much. You've got to wear your ski goggles now with virtual reality, so it is still something to think about. But there was that stage where 3D had a bit of a peak in everything from movies right the way through to live sport. And if you'd ever seen it, it was quite impactful as well. And then, as Ian said, we get onto the UHD world of HDR, high dynamic range, but not forgetting for all the audiophiles amongst us, audio. Audio went from mono to stereo, stereo to 5.1, and then 5.1 to immersive. And I sometimes wonder, and this is going to be a little controversial because Juan's going to be up here slightly later talking about things which are a little bit beyond the 4K realm of where we are today, so I'll get it out of the way sooner rather than later, and you can get your own back later, but it is a question and answer, so I'll get my own back on you. Mono to stereo, a huge jump to the human ears because you could hear things all around you in the same way as black and white to colour was a massive jump in the experience for the humans. you follow that from stereo to 5.1, it was another big jump where you could hear things coming from behind you as well as in front of you and actually pinpoint subjects. Same for video. That jump from SD to HD in colour was a big jump, and you could really see the difference. And it happened as a perfect wave when we all got flat screens, we all went digital, and we all went widescreen at the same time. So the actual impact of SD to HD was a big jump. In audio, we went from 5.1 to immersive, and I know Simon Gauntlet's here, so sorry, Simon. Not quite such an impact. Kind of, you heard more surround, and it was impactful, but not the huge jump it was from stereo to 5.1. In the same way as you went to 4K, just the pixels, a small jump. It wasn't very impactful. It's only when you add the high dynamic range on that it becomes very impactful. So you have to ask the question, what is beyond the Dolby Atmos, the DTSX of the audio? How many more channels can we hear? And what is the return? The same question comes from video. How far beyond 4K and HDR do you go to actually see a return that the consumer will actually look at? And that can also stem back to what I call CQC. You've got to have the content, you've got to have the quality of the content delivered to the consumer, and the cost of that content which is delivered. And in the olden days, we had standards. I'm probably rattling on too long, aren't I? You can tell me to stop. Standards, and these standards meant we kept that quality right the way through to the consumer. MPEG was the saviour of our times. No, it wasn't. It destroyed the pictures. If anybody has actually seen a true picture coming out of an outside broadcast of a native camera on a grade 1 monitor, and they know what that looks like, they'll know that what the consumer gets at home, even in the best compressed manner, doesn't relate to what you can see at the venue. And that's the aspiration of what we'd love to achieve, is that picture-perfect delivery. But you've got that other C at the end of the Q. It's the cost. The cost of doing that to the consumer and to the marketplace is so huge that it's not possible. And also delivering to multiple people means you need to bring the bandwidth down to get a greater dissipation of presence in the marketplace. And nowadays, you've got two more C's to worry about as well. And that's commercialization, which is the addition of commercials and added infrastructure and bits and pieces to that video signal, which can degrade the overall quality of your content as you're delivering it. And then the consumption. How do you consume it? And in days gone by, we all had those CRTs, standardized, and then we went over to flat screens. Those were 702 lines to start off with for UHD, but now we've standardized for 1080 and 2160 for ultra high definition. But kind of what other devices are we delivering on? And the youngsters of today deliver on the, I pat my back pocket, but we all know what one of these is and kind of the quality you can deliver on those. And my kids, they watch television, or they watch entertainment, as I should call it properly, on small devices, not big screens. So we have to now cater for not only those huge pixel-perfect screens with that huge dynamic range, which you probably watch in a controlled environment, to watching on a small screen in different orientations, with different resolutions, in a bright environment, which isn't conducive to what we want to do. So how do we cater and deliver the quality as we move forward? And what is beyond HD? Is it just pictures and pixel perfect? Or are we looking at accessibility, the ability to find content, and all these other nuances that we need to look at as we move forward? So there's a whole gamut of things we need to start looking at. I've got a note. I made some notes, but I don't have time to go through them here. But
questions that will take you through?
Yeah, we'll take it through. But Ian took 10 minutes, and I've taken 10 minutes. So I shall hand over to somebody else, give them a fair chance of saying something. But my leaving point is we need to keep that quality high. And that's what's starting to trail off at the moment. I know what the quality can look like, and sometimes I get very disappointed about the quality we see at the end of the day. And quality is king, and content is king.
Okay, so I'll try to make it a little bit quicker so we have time for the questions. I'm Tania Pouli. So I've been in this field for maybe 15 years now. I'm currently a consultant. A company is called Manta, so I'm working on video formats, video workflows, and basically taking more the research approach. But up till last year, I would identify myself as a researcher purely. And my background has been fairly academic in the sense that I've gotten into television kind of from the image processing, video processing side, with a PhD working on HDR, on color, on visual perception. So I'm definitely taking the same view as you, Chris, on the quality. I guess, yeah, for me, what has been always fascinating in television and in video and in imaging is that there's what we standardize, what we try to produce, what we try to create, and then there's what the eye can see. And for me, what's always been interesting is how we can bring the two closer and basically get to formats, to descriptions of content, to representations that allow us to simulate as much as we can what our eyes can really see, and therefore also leave a lot more freedom to the creatives to create something that is as immersive or as interesting as the real world. We're not there yet. There's been various attempts. For me, HDR and what's been currently going on with HDR is the one that's adding one of the biggest impacts, I guess, in that respect. But we'll debate that, I'm sure. Yeah, so there we go. I won't take more time for that. I should let Juan introduce himself as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Juan. We've still got good time for the questions, don't worry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juan Reyes, and I am the Executive Director of the 8K Association. I've been in the industry for 24, 25 years, started back in the days of a shiny little disc called the DVD, where I was authoring and developing those discs. Fast forward to Blu-ray and to 4K, little time in the 3D Blu-ray space, but now I'm working in the area of 8K. So we're talking about, resolution. There's displays, there's projectors now in the market available that provide 8K resolution. And obviously now we're talking about a new technology, new format. We've got the chicken and the egg situation to where people are asking, where's the content? And just like when 4K came out, it was there's the hardware side, there's the content side, it's all coming. And at the 8K Association, our goal is to work with the industry, work with our members to help with the education and the promotion of 8K. We're seeing displays, we're seeing projectors, and with the content, we're starting to see some of that come into play as well. One of the things we are seeing within the industry is that the screen sizes are getting much, much larger, which makes sense for the higher resolution. Back in the day with HD 4K, your average screen size was 55, 65 inches. I only know inches. I don't know centimeters, so sorry about that.
We'll still do inches for TV sizes, don't worry.
Yeah, but so now the average screen size is 75 and larger, and you can go into a store, find a 100-inch television for $1,000, even a little bit less. Projectors are projecting at 200 inches, and the thing is the screens are getting bigger, but the consumer is not moving the seating area back. They're still sitting close with a larger screen, so you're getting a much more immersive experience, and the 8K resolution will help to deliver that more immersive experience, that more emotional experience with all of that pixel depth, that higher resolution. So we're very excited to work with our member companies, to work with the partners, to work with the industry to expand the 8K ecosystem and help consumers, help the industry be more, future ready, because it's little by little, more and more of that content is coming. We had a recent conference where we were demonstrating 8K content from Warner Brothers, where they had a clip of 2001 Space Odyssey, West Side Story from MGM, and we had a clip for that in 8K. So demonstrating that things are slowly starting to move forward. So we're very excited to see that happen and have a great discussion that incorporates the higher resolution, 8K resolution, as a part of that discussion. So good to meet everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're going to have a little interesting time here because we have 2 microphones and 3 people who need it. So that's going to be great fun. As always, we didn't think about the audio as much as you should have, maybe. So And it's interesting here, and I want to pick on Chris here, because you're talking here about the loss of quality, or the issue of quality. And this is probably key to actually even the 8K story, because it's not just about content. It's, okay, we capture it in one quality, we distribute it in ways that change that quality, and we display it on a wide variety of screens with a wide variety of qualities. What's the dominant loss? Is it really truly MPEG?
Who remembers testing 1 2 3? Who remembers conversion from interlace to progressive? It's horrible. That was the biggest loss. Kind of, if you start to convert things from one format to the other format, you could ask the question. You start in the highest quality, and from then on, it is always going to slightly step down each step of the route you're going. Kind of, i.e., kind of, you start with a pure camera, even if it's an 8K camera, and then the first thing it steps down to is possibly a mezzanine format, which is possibly 4K to do in the production environment. I'm talking about live here, for example. You can't process 8K in the live environment with any great deal of cost effectiveness. So 4K is probably the stable production environment. Come for distribution, you probably find that your constraints there, so you may convert that 4K at 2160 to 1080 progressive in HDR just to be able to deliver it to a wide amount of people. So you've already gone from possibly an 8K originated camera right the way through 4K production down to 1080p deliverable, and then the consumer gets it onto their set and watches it in a bright environment and twiddles around with all those settings they can and degrades it even further. So wherever you go, you have to start off with that higher quality. If I start off with an HD and then put it through that same process, what the consumer will eventually see at the end of the day is even going to be less than that. So I'm an avid person. I will say that probably 8K has got a very good place in production and oversampling the image because you can do a great more creatively with that image. But as you go through the system, you are constantly forced to do something with that image to deliver it in a cost-effective manner to the consumer. And it is the consumer we're delivering to. And if you have a very high-value item to start off with, you're going to try and maintain that quality threshold and spend more on it to get it to the consumer than you are going to with a more mediocre piece of content that you originate with and try and deliver that through to the end. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah. And I suppose the key thing here, Tania, do you think about that, particularly with respect to what is quality in the visual image? Because is it the number of pixels, the size of the pixels, the number of pixels, how about flashing of the pixels?
The quality of the pixels, the number of the pixels. I think quality is, it depends how you measure it. There's a million ways to measure it. At the end of the day, for me, is there are humans watching the image. So quality is the quality that is perceived. We can always try and determine metrics that measure something, whether it's some statistical tendency of the image, whether it's counting something in the image. But at the end of the day, quality is what the viewer perceives. And then whatever number we associate with different dimensions, whether be it number of pixels, be it number of frames per second or dynamic range, some dimensions will count more than others to improve that perceived quality, and which dimensions count, I think, depends a lot on the type of content.
Mm-hmm. So it's content-centric rather than, say everything's the same.
Frame rate, if we're talking about sports, probably plays a fairly important role. I don't know, you have kind of a talk show where nobody's moving like we are at the moment. Frame rate has a less important role, as HDR would as well, and so on and so forth. I mean, I can find various examples, but I think the quality needs to consider the type of content. Obviously, the type of device plays, because, you're looking at something, I don't know, a video on your broken iPhone screen. I don't think 8K, 4K, or even 1080p will matter a lot. There's no question of quality in there. Mm-hmm. But I think the perceptual visual aspect is the one that we need to consider more than some statistical or quantitative measure of quality. But then it's much harder to measure.
Yeah. It does actually raise an interesting question about whether it's it's whether the video experience that you're delivering actually varies depending upon the content dynamically. Because at the end of the day, I think some of the energy sustainability routes, people have put across a very simple quality moderator, in that if you're just listening to something, you don't need the picture. So why don't you just turn off the screen? That's a bit extreme, but are we looking towards dynamic frame rates, for example?
It's an interesting thing you picked up on, because one of my first projects at the BBC many, many years ago was mixing stereo and mono to the same pictures. I actually had to degrade the image slightly and then put stereo on top of it and then show it to a large number of people. And probably 95% of the people who saw the degraded image with the stereo sound thought the image they were seeing was actually better than the mono audio with the better quality video. So it is perceived in the human brain. The human brain picks up the audio side and the visual side and actually picks up the emotion of the image. And that goes right the way through to difference between sport and movies. Kind of, if you think about how a movie shot, it's a very shallow depth of field. So there's only one part of the image, a very shallow part of the image, which is really, really sharp. Most of the other image is blurred as hell. You don't get any sharpness out of it at all. And that is deliberate. That is the artistic intent of the director, to force you to look at that part. And that is the part of the emotion that you pick up on when you're seeing that scene of the leading lady or the leading man actually doing that acting. So you have to take the whole image, the image as a whole, the content as a whole, and the sound as a whole to actually build up the perceived image you actually see at the end of the day in your head. So you can end up with a kind of a very, very good image, which is a very simple image and done at very low bandwidth. But all those elements come together in a harmonious fashion.
That's interesting, because that's extending that view. Instead of just from capture to consumption, it's from creative to consumption is the quality. It's the creative who actually is adjusting the quality dynamically for what they want to have. Okay, so we talked a lot about quality, and there's the 8K thing. Okay, then Juan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's, quality is all about, it's perceptual. And we talked a little bit about pixels, and we hear people the more pixels, the better. As you've heard, the resolution gets more and more pixels, the better quality, especially as you get into larger screens and then getting into, HDR and getting into higher frame rates. Last year, we had the opportunity, working with some of the member companies at the 8K Association, to do some live streaming of the Paris Olympics at 8K, 60p, in HDR at a big event. And we had, engineers from SMPTE, participants from the Hollywood Film Festival, watching some of the live streaming the sports. And so obviously you got a lot of motion in sports. It was a little 3-on-3 basketball event, and the image quality was just, amazing. Seeing that and all of that detail, you had the engineers walking right up to the screen looking for, little discrepancies or something. And so with that, pixels, the color, the HDR, the large screen, you put that all together, and that equated to a very, very, high quality image. The VVC encoding we use, very low bit rates, but still being able to deliver that high quality image. So there's a lot of factors, to your point, where there's many different pieces of this puzzle that equate to high quality. But we're seeing, especially as that you get into those larger screens, the pixels do start to matter, especially as you're up closer to that screen.
Okay. Oh, that's so avoided so many things. But of course, the other thing you mentioned actually about the 8K displays is that it's about the driving size of them. And I guess one of the key questions there, considering the catalogue of content we have today, luckily we don't watch a whole lot of black and white stuff anymore at 405 lines, and that is in most catalogues. But there is that movement of content that you're putting content out into 8K screens, into very large screens, that actually maybe even as low as SD. So talk to us about that aspect.
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects to that. Obviously, there's current productions now, as to your point, Chris, they're using 8K to film a lot of it at some point. converting it down to 4K. A lot of the content that's out there right now being sent to the displays is more 4K or lower resolution. But, what's a panel without talking about AI? There's a lot of advancements in AI upscaling capabilities in displays and set-top boxes to still be able to deliver a high quality, 8K image from a 4K or even from HD content. So, and that's something that is still continuing to evolve. So as more and more native 8K content comes into the ecosystem, you still have that great high quality from some of the AI upscaling capabilities that's built into the displays as it's continuing to evolve.
Okay. So actually, that's good, interesting to talk about AI, because I do remember those TV screens back when they were talking about AI before it was fashionable to talk about AI. So, yeah. But that does raise an interesting point, though, about what does it do to the creative aspect about this? And, of course, Tania, you're closest to the creative. How would they feel about manipulation of what they've produced to introduce details that wasn't there necessarily before?
I don't think they're fully convinced, for the most part, at least from the reactions I have seen and have encountered.
Yeah.
There's the recent YouTube issue that sort of surfaced. Then we can see that even the kind of users are not that happy with having their content kind of secretly messed about with AI. There's AI and AI. AI is often seen as this kind of black box that we don't know what it does and it can do whatever to your image. There is AI that can be reasonably predictable in its behavior. And I think, for upscaling, at least, if we're going from 1080p to 4K or not a huge step of upscaling, it should work. There are methods that are very well proven, they work. For HDR conversions, there are methods that are AI-based, they work. When we start doing things with AI where we're asking more complex things that involve a little bit more imagination, let's say, that's where I think there's a danger. Yeah, if we're going from SD to up to 8K, we will see issues. If we start going from, 24 FPS to 120, we're probably going to start seeing issues. So I think the use needs to be measured and sort of guided. But inevitably, if we need to get sufficient content to actually these kind of displays, we'll have to use it because it does work better than the kind of old school analytical methods. So,
although we have actually been through this before with the black and white to color transition. I do remember the shock one day when I purchased a DVD copy of The Longest Day and discovered suddenly it was in black and white. And I remember watching it in color. It's because they used a colorized version on British television during the 1970s. And in retrospect, when I've seen it now, it wasn't a great colorization. John Wayne's face was never that pink. But I suppose that's the cautionary tale here with AI. It doesn't matter about the technique you use. Is it good? Does it actually do things that make the content look good enough? And I suppose that's the key question.
Yeah, I think that it is a key question. I think it will depend on the AI and it will depend on the content again. Yeah. And then, it's going to be a necessary evil in a sense to actually just get stuff. If we move to an 8K workflow at some point, even currently in 4K workflow, we have a lot of existing content that just isn't that. So we have to do something with it.
And that actually does raise a question about the techniques being used. We have this, and also when Ultra HD was introduced, there was a number of people who were expecting a transition like SD to HD, which took place over a relatively short period of time, 10 to 15 years. Some people say we're not even out of it now, actually. But color, of course, the introduction of color was 3 decades almost for the world, from the time of the first commercial services to actually the last people to bring it on and turn it on in 1970s and early 80s. That was a massive change. And so are we too impatient with such transition? Is the reality now we're coming accustomed to the fact that it's not a transition to 4K or 8K or anything like that? What about you? What do you think, Chris?
At the end of the day, it comes down to what the customer wants, the consumer wants. Mm-hmm. kind of, does the consumer want these huge, great screens that you can't fit round the corners when you're trying to deliver it into your house? Or do we get flexible screens? I don't know the answer to that. Or would they prefer to watch on tablets and smaller devices closer up to their face? It's an open question. Kind of talking about the AI, it reminds me of the artistic intent of what's being delivered. Now, if anybody's seen Spartacus, there's a fantastic scene in there with, I think it's Charlton Heston and the leading lady, I can't remember her name, when they're in the prison cell, and there's a cut between the close-up of his face and her face. His face, craggy, pixel perfect. You can see every pore on his skin, every kind of piece of stubble coming through his face. Cut to the leading lady, soft, all softened up, and it is literally the Vaseline look on the lens. And it was an interesting contrast, and it begs the question: will the leading ladies, when you start to shoot images in 4K and 8K, actually like to be seen in kind of the native way that their skin is actually delivered? And the answer is no. I don't believe they will. Kind of, I'm not being kind of sexist in any way here, but there is a look that people have an expectation to be delivered to, and kind of that is something that is artistic, that is created at the point with the director deciding how he wants everyone at home to consume his content. So it's an interesting conundrum to actually talk about, and that leads on to film grain, which is another hot topic around at the moment, of all that noise you start to see in the pictures, which gets prevalently worse as you get to smaller sensors, smaller pixels on the sensors, because they're noisier pixels because you can't get the noise floor down. So how do you reduce that noise? How do you manage that noise? Do you remove it before you actually deliver it? Because encoding noise is terribly inefficient. And then put it back at the end of the day? Or do you actually leave the noise in because that's how the director intended it to be delivered? So there are lots of other questions about the quality which is perceived at home, which has to be addressed through the whole ecosystem, right the way through from what the director decides he wants the consumer to see, whether he wants to see a harsh image at the very beginning with all the noise and grain on the image, or whether he wants to see a nice softened image which actually delivers a more pleasant view to more people across more of their devices. So there are still lots of questions when it comes to the quality thresholds of the artistic intent versus the consumer consumption.
So actually that sort of leads us into now, what next? And this is where you can get your crystal balls out. However, we shall see how good those are, because we'll return to this subject in a future time. So Juan, where are we going? Because we did say where we are now is we've got all these different resolutions. We've got all the content being captured at fairly high resolution. But where next?
I mean, what's the next big thing for us? Where are we going to be going? Obviously, there's the resolution, where the resolution is increasing. The screen sizes are increasing, but also you're starting to have, the more immersive viewing experience with, the wearable gear. You're having on the gaming side. We haven't even talked gaming, which is still on the television side, where you're getting, higher resolution also. 8K gaming at 120 hertz is something we demonstrated as well, which gave an extremely immersive experience. And I think that's where the consumer's going, how can I be more immersed into what I'm watching? They're seeing things like the Sphere, like Cosm, where they're going to these experiences where these are like, oh my God, these are so immersive, so amazing, super realistic. How can I get some of that into my home? So it's trying to do that with the bigger screens, with the bigger projectors, with the more resolution, with the immersive sounds, with the, people setting up their, next gen audio with the 7.1.4 configurations in the home where it fits. You have sound bars now that have the capability to deliver that overhead immersive sound without having to put holes into your ceiling. So it's bringing more of that outside immersive experience into the home, whether it's resolution or bigger screens or audio or what have you. So we're just trying to push that forward. The 8K ecosystem is working with, the industry, the content creators, the technology companies, the hardware manufacturers to try to educate and promote being future ready for whatever's coming next. And I think that's just, the resolution, the screens, the audio is just a part of it.
Tania.
So two-part answer. For me, I think one part is that what we're seeing at the moment, beyond the format characteristics, we're moving to 4K, 8K, HDR, and so on and so forth. We can list all the characteristics. There is a change as to what television means. I mean, what all of us consider in here as television, it's not the same to what our kids consider television and their kids will consider. So I think there's a massive transition as to what television type entertainment is becoming. And it seems like it's splitting into two extremes, which is the kind of always on, always present, but not necessarily qualitative kind of consumption of content, you know, on the phone or whatever, on the tablets, in the bus. And then there's the hugely immersive, as Juan described, you know, massive screens, surround sound, and so on and so forth. And then the other thing I think we will have to probably face is the aspect of kind of, let's say, diminishing returns potentially. We're pushing for more immersive, better, higher quality content. But at some point, the improvements, I'm not sure, are worth the cost. And which point that is, I don't know. And when I'm talking about cost, there's the cost in terms of production, in terms of equipment, and so on. But also, I think something that we'll have to consider is the energy cost, because we're pushing for a huge amount of data, finally, that the compression algorithms, even though they're improving, they're getting also to the point of diminishing returns in terms of how much time is required to actually encode to get the improvements. So yeah, we can always get bigger pipes and bigger TVs, but yeah, we're also burning down the planet. So, you know, at some point we may need to consider that, yeah, that's good enough. So, yeah.
Chris?
Let's go and watch a play in a theatre. Or save the encoding. Broadcast is, I think it's Greek, isn't it? It means spread widely or widely spread. And that's a traditional way of doing it, spreading your content to a huge amount of person. And that's exactly what you're saying, a very cost-effective way to getting your content to a large group of people. And then we start to look at the niche areas, as again, you said, and I agree with that totally. We saw 3D, we saw virtual reality peak and come back down to a trough, and it'll probably find its niche. But I believe that finding the sweet spot for the broadcast, be that on the big screen or be it on a tablet or a phone, is going to be the utopia we're looking for. My son watches football matches on 3 screens. He's got a screen up in front. He's got the wide screen, the HD screen, UHD screen. He's got a tablet or a laptop, and he's got his phone. And he's literally watching all these screens at the same time. And he's in heaven because he can watch all this content at the same time. Me, I just like to watch one thing, which is very high quality in a controlled environment with very good sound. I'm different to him. He wants a different form of entertainment than I do. And as we move forward, we've got to adapt to what the new generation, the next generation of viewers of our content are actually going to want to look at. And I think, as you said, it's finding that sweet spot. Is it the broadcast, or is there something around that broadcast, that bell curve that's sweet, that starts to slope off, that you can hit as well as that sweet spot? Or are there one main piece of content and lots of other niche areas of content which have a lesser return? 44 seconds.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to have the last word, especially on that last question. For me, we have such a diverse range of display devices now. We have a interactive method of delivering that content so that we can actually deliver personalized video to that specific device that's suited to that device, formatted for that device. If it's in portrait mode, we can deliver it in portrait. If we wanted to from the same source, we can dynamically crop and pan across the content suited for that particular display dynamically, whether that's through human factors or through AI factors. We have that capability. And also, because of the fact we are now in the phase of delivering capacity that actually far exceeds what we can individually use. And the issue of capacity is much more being moved to what all the ISPs can actually provide to us. But locally ourselves, the fact that they're worried about a 20 megabits per second 4K stream is really odd, considering they've just sold us a gigabit connection that's supposed to be able to do 50 times that almost. At the end of the day, we have that capability. And once they've got the capacity issues paid for, resolved. And then we have that dynamic capability of the content to be delivered to whatever the display device is. And that, I think, is a future. So it's not just about resolution, it's about everything. It's about making it look as good as it can be wherever it is. And the creative factor, which we've drawn out from this discussion here, the creative has the content quality button to press. And in many respects, some of the things we do, we're delivering high quality content. Actually, we're delivering effectively HD quality because the creative has done HD style editing and creative. And just displaying it on on more pixels doesn't actually improve the quality. And I think that's an issue to solve. Thank you very much for your time.